Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by Dr. Mauro Silva Júnior. He's professor in the Department of Basic Psychological Processes at the Psychology Institute at the University of Brasilia in Brazil. He works on interpersonal relationships, especially the traits of individuals and their social partners, such as sex differences, differences between parents and friends, and the use of technology as a mediator of social interactions. And today we're focusing mostly on interpersonal relationships from an evolutionary perspective, things like personality, sexual orientation, sociosexuality, and the role some of those factors play in interpersonal relationships, namely in those particular cases, romantic relationships, and also a little bit on mating systems in human societies, also from an evolutionary perspective. So, Mauro, welcome to the show. It's a big pleasure to everyone.
It's my pleasure, Ricardo. Thanks for the invitation.
So to start with interpersonal relationships, there, of course, in humans, there's different kinds of interpersonal relationships, like, for example, relationships between parents and their offspring, friendships, romantic relationships. So let's start perhaps with a general introduction here, and then we might tackle each specific kind of interpersonal relationship in turn here. So what aspects of human cognition and motivation would you say play the biggest role in interpersonal relationships from an evolutionary perspective?
Okay. Yes, I would say that there are a lot of different aspects of our cognition, motivation that play a role in our interpersonal relationships. I think you and your public may be familiar with the cheater detection system and the kin detection system. They comprise what we call cognition. But from an evolutionary perspective, I think it doesn't make much sense to separate cognition and motivation. For example, if one individual learn cues to detect cues to learn who their kin are, this individual is also more likely to trade off his or her own welfare to provide benefits to their kin. So this is also motivation, right? I see that most of the time, cognition and motivation work together to regulate behavior. So I think this is the right way to approach this. And I think this difference is more didactic. It makes sense in this didactical sense, but usually they work together. But from the motivational aspects, I would say that that is the search and maintenance for romantic and sexual relationships, and also to develop friendships. It's interesting the fact of studying the interpersonal relationships from the evolutionary perspective is that it challenges an old idea that studying the evolution of our behavior is kind of lead us to an understanding of an individualistic perspective of humans. But this is far from true. As more as I study the interpersonal relationships, more I came to the conclusion that from the cognition perspective or the motivational perspective, how social we are, how dependent of others we are. And this can be it's very clear in studies from the evolutionary perspective. I think, for example, the revised pyramid of needs from an evolutionary perspective as a powerful framework to understand how our motivational systems are related to sociality. And that's why I do it with a great pleasure.
Mm-hmm. And so let's get specifically now into relationships with parents. So what aspects, again, of our human psychology play the biggest role here? I mean, what aspects of our human psychology do you think are more important for people to have a good understanding of, to understand how relationships with parents work from an evolutionary perspective?
Well, I would say there are a lot of them, but for example, I would say that paternity uncertainty play an important role. I have data from this on my PhD dissertation, where I studied the interpersonal relationships, not only with parents, but with the relatives in general. I used the social networks questionnaire that was developed by Robin Damba and applied this questionnaire in Brazil. So in this questionnaire, we requested very specific information about each of individuals' relatives, like they have to describe the initials of their names, their age, their sex, if they were maternal or paternal, if they were genetic or adoptive relatives, the emotional closeness that people felt towards them, and how far they lived from each other. One interesting result about this study was our discovery that people described more maternal relatives than paternal relatives. And it's interesting because we collected data in Brazil, in England, and in Belgium. But it's very unlikely, right, that people in 3 different countries have more maternal relatives than paternal relatives. But there is an answer for that. For example, we asked people to use their mobile agenda to fulfill the questionnaires. And if they have used the mobile agenda, they could not forget anyone. But in fulfilling the questionnaires, we also would see an alphabetic order. For example, the first people to be described would be, for example, Alice, and then Brandon. And in the late sections, it would be Ricardo, but Mauro before Ricardo. But we don't see an alphabetic order in any of these questionnaires. What people did, they have a logic on describing those relationships, but they didn't use the mobile agenda. Actually, when you see the first rank position, the first line of the questionnaire, it's in most of cases, more than 76% of the time, I think, it was their mothers. Usually, their mothers is the first line, the first person they describe, the first rank position in the questionnaire. The second rank position is, in most of cases, their fathers, and in the third rank position, their siblings. And from this point on, they start to describe other kinds of relatives from the maternal side of the family and the paternal side of the family. And this pattern is found in all 3 countries. But the way they decided to describe their relationships is give us a clue why they describe it more maternal than paternal relatives. It's because there is an association between the rank position and the emotional closeness they feel towards each of those people. For example, their mother, that was usually the first person they described, they had the highest emotional closeness level. And when you go to the second, the third, and fourth rank positions, there is a decrease of the emotional closeness level. So I don't believe the participants were aware they were doing this, but there is a logic on doing this. Once they didn't use the mobile agenda, they had to use a different logic, and they used the emotional closeness level. So we actually found a negative correlation between rank position and emotional closeness level. The highest the emotional closeness level is associated with the lower rank positions. And even more interesting than that is the fact that with the maternal relatives, in all 3 countries, people had the highest emotional closeness level when compared to the paternal ones. I think this is interesting because, for example, we have three countries, two in Europe and one in South America. We can say the three of them they belong to the Western cultures, but we cannot say that we can't say they are the same. There are similarities among them, but there are also cultural differences among them, even if we consider England and Belgium. This kind of relationship that is more proximate with maternal relatives seems to be the case of Western cultures. For example, in traditional societies where there is a norm of patriarchal norm, where women, when they get married, they leave their campsite and go to live with the husband's family. Their families make guarantees that they're getting married virgins. So when they get married, they are not only controlled by the vigilance of their own husbands, but also with the husband's family. And in these societies, if you ask children from which grandparents or uncles and aunts, which of them, the maternal side of the paternal side, they like more, they would say the paternal side. They would choose their paternal grandparents, the paternal uncles, the paternal ones, because it's among them that they are raised and they develop more intimate relationships with them. But in the absence of a norm like this, people actually become more close to the maternal side of the family. And we understand this through the lens of the paternal uncertainty. So the paternity uncertainty in traditional societies makes easier for children to develop strong relationship with the paternal side of the family, but in the absence of this, in this cultural norm, people develop more close relationships with the maternal side of the family because, for instance, there is a 100% of certainty that the maternal side of the family belongs to the same family.
No, that's very interesting. Actually, before you got to the last part of your answer, I was really going to ask you about paternity uncertainty and if it really played a role there, but you already answered that part. And so I guess that in that particular case, with the study you did there, particularly, we could say that there are cultural factors playing a role here, but also aspects of our evolved psychology, like in that specific case, paternity uncertainty, that might also play a role, at least in the absence of those cultural factors you pointed to, like, for example, a patrilocality. Correct?
Yes. And I think that must be the case because, for example, if we go back to the 4 questions of ethology, our behavior is better understood if we know all the ultimate and proximate explanations of behavior. And I think in this case, we have an ultimate causation, which is paternity uncertainty, and approximate causation, which is this patrilocal norm.
There you are referring to Tinberger's 4 questions, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So what about friendships then? So that's about what we talked here was about relationships between parents and their offspring. And now what about friendships? What aspects of our evolved psychology play a role there?
I also can say there are many factors involved, but one of those factors that I think is one of the most important ones is homophily. Homophily is the degree of similarity between two people. For example, if they share the same age, the same sex or gender, if they have similar interests for sports, for music, if they share a similar traits of personality. And homophily is the degree of similarity between them. There is also a twin for homophily for couples, which is homogamy. Homogamy describes exactly the same thing. And we can understand homogamy as associative mating, the level of similarity between couples. But coming back from France, I think that homophily is very powerful to understand this, because it really shapes how we interact with other people. And I would try to illustrate this case, give an example of a game in Brazil. I don't know if you have a similar game in Portugal or in the countries of your audience, but there is a game, a chair game where, for example, we have 5 chairs, but only 4 players.
No, no, we have the same game here. Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting. And the music is playing, and these 4 players are running around the chairs. And when the music stops, those players have to find a seat for themselves. But once there is only 4 chairs, so one of the players will be left out. And then the game starts another round. And I think from a developmental perspective, this is what happens in our relationships with friends. There are some people that have a seat, for example, for some time, but they might leave eventually for some reason. I have data about this also from my PhD dissertation, and I came to the conclusion, Ricardo, that we kind of manage our interpersonal relationships. And what do I exactly mean when I say manage? I really mean manage, because there are more people in the world that we are able to form and maintain our relationship. That's the premise of the Dunbar's number theory, right? That you are familiar with. So maybe there is a limitation, a cognitive limitation to manage those relationships, and we have to choose to pick people from the crowd and use the degree of similarity between us and them to develop these friendships. For example, if 2 people that don't know each other, in their first contact, they came to know that they have studied in the same school, for example, or in the same university. Yeah. This information alone will work as increasing the likelihood of a positive interaction. So they will feel more close to each other because they shared something. So that's why I think that we do have an active role in our relationships. Even if we're not aware of this, we of course are not aware that we're choosing people because of the sex, because of the gender, but we like more people who are similar to us. Even more recent studies about politics, for example, show that we have more interest with people with whom we share more similarities, with whom we share more our political view and etc. So I think homophily is a good candidate to understand how our friendship can be understood from this psychological perspective.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, would the rationale behind homophily be something like we tend to prefer to establish relationships with people that are similar to us in our interests, goals, and so on, because they would help us achieve those same goals and interests? Is that it?
Yes, I believe yes. Because, for example, if people share the same interests, they might have the same agenda. If you have a coalitional psychological perspective of this relationship, if people share the same interests, they might share the same agenda. And when I say agenda, I mean this is general, not only political ones, but that could facilitate cooperation for certain.
So let's get now into romantic partners then, and I guess that the rest of the interview will focus a lot on romantic relationships in different ways. So we've already tackled parent-offspring relationships and friendships. What factors, from an evolutionary perspective, play the biggest role, or some of the biggest factors here in romantic relationships or relationships between romantic partners?
I tend to focus on relationship satisfaction when I'm studying romantic relationships, because from an evolutionary psychological perspective, relationship satisfaction is the subjective feeling that weighs the costs and benefits of our relationships. So if the benefits outweigh the costs, people would feel more satisfied with their relationships, for example. And there are a lot of other variables that might influence people's relationship satisfaction. The one of those that I chose to understand this was the adult attachment theory. And why is that? Many studies show there is a positive correlation between a secure attachment and relationship satisfaction. But on the other hand, there are also some studies that show there is no association between them, or some studies that show there is a negative association between them, that is an expected correlation between security and relationship satisfaction. So in a recent paper published last year, my students and I sought to investigate using a systematic review to understand this question: if there is indeed the relationship between secure attachment and satisfaction is positive. And we also try to take into account the cultural differences that might exist, because the attachment theory was developed, as most of the psychological theories, was developed in Western cultures. So it's interesting for, not only interesting, but it's important for an evolutionary perspective, take into account a cross-cultural view. So at the end, I think we had 33 studies from many parts of the world, and the majority of them, like 80% of them, confirmed this association. There is a positive association between secure attachment and relationship satisfaction, or a negative association between insecure attachment and relationship satisfaction. And this is also true for both Western countries and non-Western countries, like Malaysia, like Iran, for example. And but there are some important differences among those countries too. For example, we also found that studies that found no association between the two constructs, and there are studies that also found that there is a negative association between secure attachment and relationship satisfaction. And the majority of these results who do not conform the general rule, they belong to non-Western countries. To be honest, I don't have an explanation for this. What we know is that in different countries, the predominant attachment style might differ. In some cases is the secure attachment, in other cases is the avoidant attachment, or the anxious avoidance. So the predominant style might, of course, interfere in this relationship. But in general, yes, I would say that the answer is that most of studies in both Western and non-Western countries show the positive association between security and satisfaction.
Mhm. And of course, there's also other factors that could play a role here, and one of them is personality or personality traits. So, what is the role played by personality in interpersonal relationships in general? Now I'm talking about interpersonal relationships in general, not just romantic relationships.
Okay. Uh, Well, I would say that if we take, for example, the Big Five framework, we can understand that we can see that those personality traits influence our behavior in general. For example, there are evidence that people who have a certain type of relationship of personality, they tend to be more extrovert or more introvert, for example.
Mhm.
I'm actually more interested in the dark triad personality traits. For
Okay.
example, in the literature, there is evidence that these personality traits like Machiavellianism, like psychopathy and narcissism, they play a role in social relationships because these three traits share a common antisocial psychology that in a way that individuals act in a certain way to provide benefits for themselves at the expansion of other people. And there are a lot of studies showing that, for example, that people with higher levels of dark triad traits, they tend to lie more, they tend to cheat on exams more, they cheat on their partners more frequently than people who have uh, lower levels of dark triad personality traits.
Mhm. And by the way, how do you approach personality from an evolutionary perspective? I'm asking you that because, at least as far as I understand it, and through the conversations I had on the show with many evolutionary psychologists at this point, they are mostly interested, or you are mostly interested in understanding the aspects of our evolved psychology that are theoretically at least universal. There is the common information processing mechanisms, the ones that are common across all societies, all humans. But then there are personality traits that, I mean, play a role in explaining individual differences. I mean, they are one aspect of our individual differences. So, how do you approach personality from an evolutionary perspective?
Okay, I also tend to agree with this, but I think we will find this universal aspect of personality, as many other psychological aspects such as emotion, cognition, motivation,
Mhm.
in the relationship between the demands of the environment, such as an adaptive problem, and the supposed psychological process that is involved with the solution of this adaptive problem. And maybe that's why we can find this association between dark triad traits and antisocial behavior, because in some cases it's adaptive for people to benefit themselves, even if at the expense of other people. Uh, but I cannot say, for example, that it's not the same to say that all people will present the same personality traits or they will present the same level of these traits. And why is that? Probably because they are exposed to different environments, and in response to the challenge of those environments, they developed a certain level of personality traits. So they could be higher in psychopathy and narcissism, but other people who are not exposed to this kind of environments would develop other kinds of personality traits. There is an indication, for example, from life history theory that the dark triad traits may be part of the fast life history strategy. I have a chapter on this, but I think this association between the dark triad traits and the life history, the fast life history strategy, is not as straightforward as has been acknowledged in the literature. There are some shortcomings that provide some doubts that we should not consider the dark triad personality so easily as part of the faster life history.
Yeah, in that particular case, I mean, if that would be true, then according to life history theory applied to humans, in that, so if people are exposed to an environment where there's more resource stress, I mean, they have fewer resources and stuff like that, and fewer lower future prospects and stuff like that, then they would tend to develop higher levels of the dark triad personality traits because those would be adaptive in that kind of environment. Is that it?
Yes, but those studies also show that this is true for some of the person from the dark triad traits, but it's not true for the others. And in some cases, they go against the hypothesis. And for example, a student of mine just presented her master's thesis, and she found that psychopathy was not in adolescents was not related to the level of severity or unpredictability in their environments. So I think, yes, there is an indication, but it's not so strong.
So let's talk a little bit now about the evolution of sexual orientation. So how do you approach it from an evolutionary perspective?
Yeah, I think, Ricardo, it's best to describe the evolution of same-sex sexual behavior because the concept of sexual orientation is specific to humans and particularly from Western cultures. The non-Western cultures, they don't have this concept of sexual orientation. For example, the Fafafinis from Samoa, which is a culture that has same-sex sexual behavior. And I'm sorry, I will say only SSB to make it easier.
Sure.
So in the Samoa Islands, there is SSB, but we find in the Fafafinis. Fafafinis are adult males who develop a sexual attraction to other adult males, but they have another gender. So they dress in a different way, and this third gender is recognized by the society. It's not the same as being a woman. The Fafafinis of Samoa, they do know that there exists the gay men in the West, but they say they are not gay men. And when it's asked them why, they say that gay men have sex with other gay men, while Fafafinis have sex with heterosexual men. So we can see in here a difference between what is a sexual orientation, how it is conceptualized in the West, and a question about gender, how it is conceptualized in the islands of Samoa. So what there is in common between them? The same sex sexual behavior or the same sex sexual attraction. So I would say it's better to describe the the SSB, for example. And we can understand SSB also from a cross-cultural perspective and a comparative perspective. In the evolution of SSB, for example, a lot of different hypotheses have been tested, and some of them suggest that we might not have a single explanation for SSB in different animal species. For instance, the inability to discriminate between males and females might be the explanation why we find SSB in fruit flies, for example. On the other hand, in species like dolphins, the better explanation for SSB will be learning the appropriate sexual behavior to present with an individual of a different sex. But none of these hypotheses can be applied to humans for the reason that I already mentioned it. And that there is more things on the table about those hypotheses. And I would say, for example, that in the past, same-sex sexual behavior was considered a Darwinian paradox. And researchers tended to think that way because they worked on the assumption that SSB would not benefit the fitness of the individuals who present this behavior. But from the recent decades, there are more and more evidence showing quite the opposite, that the SSB actually increases, if not directly, but indirectly, the fitness of the individuals who present this behavior.
And so in that particular case, the hypothesis that you're working with there is the one where, for example, there would be an increase in fitness for the individual himself because they would participate perhaps in activities regarding the children of other members of their family. And that's the way by which they would increase indirectly their fitness, right? Because at least a percentage of their genes would also be in the bodies of, for example, their brothers or sisters, children, and so they would, for example, help raise them, and that would be a way of at least indirectly increasing their own fitness. That's the hypothesis you're going with there, right?
Yes, this is the kin selection hypothesis to understand the evolution of same-sex attraction. Yeah.
And do you know if this would apply to both male and female people with same sexual behavior or with same-sex behavioral attraction and sexual behaviors or not?
There is some controversy in this area also with humans. For example, there are also many different hypotheses to understand SSB in humans. The most prominent ones tend to be the sexually antagonistic selection hypothesis and the kin selection hypothesis, as you mentioned it. Also, we have the fraternal birth order hypothesis, but it's more approximate explanation. So it seems that we don't have a single answer for the SSB in women and men. It seems that there are multiple pathways working on for the SSB in males and females. For example, the organizational effects of androgens in the intrauterine life, it seems to be a better explanation for SSB in human females. And from the other side, the kin selection hypothesis and the fraternal both or the hypothesis might be the better explanation for SSB in human adult males.
Mhm. So when it comes to these more proximate explanations or some of these potential explanations, because as you said there, we're still not completely sure about the correct explanation behind SSB, these could be something that is not, I mean, completely the result of just evolution, but perhaps some contextual factors as well, like in the case of the birth order effect. I mean, that's not straightforwardly the result of evolution, but also in that particular case, the fact that one male, I guess we're talking about males exclusively in that case, a male that
Yes.
comes in terms of the birth order after their or his brothers or sisters would tend to have a higher probability of being homosexual, right?
Yes, yes. And I think that as I said before, that maybe there are many mechanisms working on to understand SSB, and they
Yeah.
might not be the same for human males and females.
Mhm.
And I would say also that that there are really interesting studies, and some of them are really powerful. But it's something that is also being developed at the moment, because, for example, the kin selection hypothesis provides evidence for SSB in cultures, in non-Western cultures, for example, just like those of the Samoa Islands. But we don't find support for the kin selection hypothesis in the Western cultures, probably because in those societies, homosexuality and bisexuality are not fully accepted. And so this may create family problems between those individuals who present the SSB and their family, so they do not develop intimate, more stronger ties with the family.
Mhm. So let's get into the topic of sociosexuality here. That is also something that you've studied. So what is, first of all, perhaps I guess you could explain a little bit what actually sociosexuality is, and then what role does it play when it comes to romantic relationships?
Oh, yes. Social sexuality is defined as the individual disposition towards uncommitted sex, and it's usually measured using the social sexual orientation inventory revised, the SOIR, which is comprised of three different dimensions: the behavioral dimension, the attitudinal dimension, and the desire dimension. Uh, in in most studies, social sexuality tends to be higher, which means that people have more positive attitudes towards uncommitted sex, or they have more sexual partners in men compared to women.
Mhm.
So yes,
Mhm.
I would
And
say
what,
this.
yeah, and what explains individual differences in sociosexuality? I mean, you mentioned there are differences or general differences between men and women, but I would imagine that even among men and among women, we should find different levels of sociosexuality across individuals, correct?
Yes, indeed, that's exactly what we find. Social sexuality is a measure of individual differences, and this exactly what we find. For example, there is not only differences between men and women, but also in sexual orientation. Uh, for more than a decade, for 1 decade or more, we have the indication that gay men have a higher social sexuality than straight men, for example. And single individuals also tend to have a higher social sexuality than individuals who are in a relationship. And that makes sense, right? Because if they do not have a relationship, they are on the searching mode for a partner. But it's interesting, Ricardo, that I have found this in different studies, that even men, regardless of their sexual orientation, who are in a romantic relationship, if they have a higher social sexuality, they actually have had more than one partner during the last 12 months, the time in which they were in this committed relationship. So being in a relationship in some way decreases the level of social sexuality, because maybe these people are more focused in a single relationship, but it doesn't mean they not have other relationships if they have a higher social sexuality.
And I mean, I guess that there are other specific behaviors. For example, earlier you mentioned an increased predisposition toward infidelity, cheating on their partners, and so on. But I guess there would be other specific behaviors associated with sociosexuality, like, for example, in your work, I read about earlier onset of sexual debut, reduced sexual disgust, risk-taking behaviors, right? So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, for sure. If we consider the definition of social sexuality, which is being willing to have uncommitted sex, one might expect that for an individual to have uncommitted sex, that must be casual sex, and otherwise people would never do it. And some of those mechanisms, some of those candidates are a lower sexual disgust and a higher risk-taking behavior. For example, if an individual is looking for a casual sex, and maybe it's not always the case that people who have uncommitted sex have sex with strangers, but in some cases it happens that there are some strangers. So if you not fully know this person, you have to assume some risks when you have such intimate contact with this person, right? For example, some studies found that Tinder users, they have not only a higher social sexuality, but they also have a lower level of sexual disgust and higher levels of risk-taking behaviors. I have unpublished data of this here in Brazil, and I found exactly the same thing. Unfortunately, it's not published yet, but we included in this research sexual orientation and hookups apps who are more common among the LGBTQR community. When people use these hookups apps, they are more interested in casual sex, and they very often have sex with strangers. So you assume some risk when you're doing that, because you're going to find someone that you don't know, and you're receiving this person in your place, or you're going to this person's place, and actually we don't know what's going to happen. What we found was that the gay men who use hookups apps have higher social sexuality than the heterosexual men that use the same hookups apps. And they also have a higher sexuality compared to those gay men who are not users of these hookups apps. So there is this interaction between the use of the apps and the sexual orientation.
Mhm. So let me ask you, by the way, since you mentioned hookup apps and Tinder specifically there, let me ask you one question about that. So you said that people who are on these apps tend to have higher levels of sociosexuality than the general population, correct?
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
so
Then the non-users.
than the non-user. So if that's the case, then wouldn't there be perhaps some limitations when it comes to, for example, when people try to use Tinder data and the data from other apps to extrapolate from those data to the general population in terms of, for example, behaviors by men and women when it comes to the kinds of uh, partners or sexual partners they prefer? I mean, I'm asking you because many times we tend to assume that we would find happening on Tinder and other apps would correlate with behaviors that would find in the general population, but maybe there are some limitations there in terms of how much we can extrapolate or not.
Yes, for sure. I would say that this methodology that compares users and non-users
Mhm.
is more related to the fact that the users of hookups apps are in some way in the search mode of the
Oh, okay.
to find new partners. Of course, these apps show to people many different people, so they can get to know each other only swiping right or swiping left or sending a message. So it's very easily, and you can do this seated on your in your sofa, right?
Mhm.
It's not so costly to do that. It's very different when you are in a social interaction regularly with other people, so you
Yeah.
can focus only one person at the time. But yes, I do agree with you. We cannot generalize what people do on these apps, but they are also interesting to compare
Mhm.
the behavior of users and non-users.
No, no, I mean, I agree. It's just that I was asking or perhaps pointing to the fact that maybe, at least in certain cases, we have to be a little bit more careful when assuming that the way people or users of these apps would behave there would mirror the way that people that are non-users or the general population would behave in a sort of real life situation or context, right?
Yes, yes. In this case, I do agree with you. We cannot make this generalization.
Mhm. And do levels of sociosexuality correlate then with different mating strategies in terms of people being more short-term or long-term oriented, for example?
Oh yes, oh yes. We have to remember that social sexuality is indeed a measure of a short-term mating orientation. It's not. It's something that I really advise people when I'm talking about this. Is the fact that people that who are higher on social sexuality, they can also form long-term relationships. It's not deterministic, right? And this is one of the reasons why the soy, especially, or the conceptualization of social sexuality has been criticized by not fully capturing the all possibilities of mating orientations in humans,
Mhm.
but instead is focusing only on the short-term mating orientation.
Right.
Uh, and that makes sense because when you use the soy R, we are actually measuring how many partners people had in the last 12 months or how many partners they had in their whole life. So if you have a higher level of sexual partners on these measures, you are more short-term orientated than other people. But indeed, there are some empirical and theoretical shortcomings of this, and some authors have indicated these shortcomings about the conceptualization of the social sexuality. But despite these limitations, and also at the same time in accordance of this conceptualization, people with higher social sexuality, they actually tend to have more extra pair relationships. They For example, there is a recent study that showed that social sexuality is a powerful predictor of voluntary singlehood, both in men and women. And as I told you before, even if they are in a relationship, they tend to have higher number of partners than those who have a restricted social sexuality. So I would say that indeed social sexuality is a measure of a short-term mating orientation.
So a very interesting study that you did was that you studied sociosexuality during the COVID-19 pandemic. What could you tell us about it? Like, for example, was there any correlation between sociosexuality and the adoption of social distancing measures to prevent the transmission of COVID? And I mean, I would imagine that if that was the case, it would probably have something to do with people who score higher on sociosexuality also scoring higher on risk-taking behaviors, right?
Oh, yes, I believe yes, and thanks for the question. That was an interesting study that I carried out with two colleagues of mine during the worst phases of the pandemic here in Brazil. And just to give you some background of this study, we carried out this study during this phase of the pandemic. At that time, we didn't have vaccines, and as other countries in the world, the pandemic was very polarized in Brazil. So there were people who did not believe that was a serious issue, and they felt comfortable for not wearing masks and gathering around with other people. So the theoretical question that motivated this study was to understand if there was some kind of trade-off that people might be experiencing at the time. For example, in the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't know for sure how much long it would take to stay at home, right? It's relatively okay if you do this effort for a month, maybe. But if the quarantine takes longer, like 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, or maybe a year, it requires more effort of people to doing that. And actually, staying in the quarantine for a long period affects your life in many ways, in general. Like, for example, you're not seeing your family, but also you're not having contact with romantic partners or sexual partners. If you're a single, that might be even more difficult because maybe you have those needs, and you don't have a partner with whom we may share this intimacy. So that was exactly in the point we were interested. If people would prevent the COVID infection, or they would present this risk behavior to satisfy those needs. We collected data only with men with different sexual orientations, bisexuals, gays, and heterosexuals. And I think we had more than 500 individuals from all regions of Brazil. And what the main results showed that a minority of those men were fully following the guidance of staying at home, only a minority of them. And a great proportion of those men actually had some kind of uncommitted sex with someone. They were not in all cases strangers, but in some cases those people were strangers. And with a greater concern with strangers, some of those men had an unprotected sex. So they took the risks, the risk of getting two different kinds of infections: the coronavirus, and the
A sexually
sexually
transmitted infection.
infections. Yeah, thank you. And as you said, there was a correlation between social sexuality and an earlier onset of sexual debut. And I think this study is important not only because it provided more information about individual differences in social sexuality, but this study can inform public policies because provides information that in a situation like the pandemic that was really unusual for all of us, people will not behave in the same way, even if they have the same information. So if the governments, for example, want to inform people and encourage them to behave in a certain way to avoid the spread of the virus, they have to take into account that not everyone will behave in a similar way, because people are not similar. They have their differences, and not only about social sexuality or risk-taking behaviors, but in many others. So as more we know about this, about the individual differences, more we are able to maybe really be effective in public policies such as those related to the pandemic.
So perhaps in that specific case, if we take into account individual differences, we would have to tailor the message to people with different personality traits, or with other individual differences like sociosexuality, right?
Indeed, yes.
Mm-hmm. And I guess just another comment before we get into another topic, I guess that this study that you did on sociosexuality during the COVID-19 pandemic because when I was asking the question, I mentioned that probably it was related to higher levels of risk-taking behavior. But in that particular case, when you mentioned some of those individuals that didn't follow the social distancing measures, having had sex, unprotected sex specifically, perhaps it also relates to reduced sexual disgust on their part.
Can you explain more about this?
I mean, I was saying that if some of those individuals that you mentioned there had unprotected sex with the partners they had, then in terms of these being related to sociosexuality, perhaps it would also be a manifestation of their reduced sexual disgust, or not.
Hypothetically speaking.
Yes, hypothetically.
Yes, because this is important question, because we didn't measure sexual disgust.
Yes.
And we measured risk-taking behavior indirectly by the measure of following or not the guidelines of staying at home. But well, I would say
that's an important clarification, but I was just saying hypothetically. Sure.
Yes, I agree.
So let's get then into mating systems in humans. Of course, I guess that I don't know if you agree with me, but I guess that from the discussions I had on the show with evolutionary psychologists and anthropologists in general, there are three main mating systems in human societies: monogamy, polygyny, and polyandry. So, but how do you approach mating systems from an evolutionary perspective?
Okay, I think the mating systems, we have to understand that they represent a pattern of sexual behavior that is found at the species level or at the populational level. We're not talking about individuals like we have been talking previously. Yeah, what do I know about mating systems is more related to the primate literature. And what we can say about primates is that primates usually have a primary mating system, but they might have a secondary and or a tertiary mating system.
Okay.
So in humans, when it comes to humans, there is a debate if our primary mating system is monogamy or polygyny, right? In the past, in the early 2000s, there was more agreement that the majority of societies were more polygynous societies, but nowadays it seems for me, I'm not following exactly the literature on this topic, but I tend to think that anthropologists have been suggesting that there are more monogamous societies nowadays. And the reason for that is because of the cultural contact between different cultures, especially the cultures in the West. But despite the fact that 24 years ago, the studies showed that there was more polygamous societies in the world. Most of people were monogamous. And why is that? Because even if the society allows some men, we actually found more polygynous society than polyandry societies. And even if those societies allows men to have more than one wife, not all men in those societies can afford to have larger families. So even if they want to have larger families, they cannot afford for this because of material resources. They do not have. And the point that I understand about the mating systems in humans is the specific benefits and trade-offs related to the benefits and costs in which societies develop some kind of mating systems, from monogamy to polyandry or monogamy. It seems that the social ecology plays a significant role in the adoption of these mating systems in humans. The ability of men to have more resources, but also which sex is responsible for the material resources in the societies, in the societies, and many other socio-ecological factors.
But can we say if there's a predominant mating system in human societies? Because as you mentioned there, and from the conversations I had with, for example, anthropologists on the show, I guess that what you said there is up to date, that most traditional societies that we studied until recently were predominantly polygynous, but now in more recent times they tend to be more monogamous. I mean, most societies across the globe, and the bigger ones at least. So, I mean, can we really say that we as humans have one predominant or primary mating system? Or, I mean, is it that it just depends on our socio-ecology and that's all we can say about it?
That's a big question. I don't know if I'm the best person to tell you that, but my perspective on this is that the mating systems in humans or other primates are the results of the interaction of our evolved mechanisms and the environment, right? So I would say that if most of societies adopt one mating system of the or other, depends on their interaction of those factors. And of course, we have to take into account the specific historical moment we are considering. Maybe 10,000 years ago, we would have a different a different predominant mating system in humans. But 24 years ago, anthropologists tended to think that polygamy was the most predominant. And now we say that is monogamy. And I think that polygamy and monogamy may be the most important ones in the sense of how frequent they are. But that depends, of course, of the time scale we are considering, right? Because evolutionary processes are also historical processes, and we have to take into account the time scale when we make these conclusions or these assertions.
So, I mean, it's not really correct to say that we are, for example, a monogamous species or a polygynous species. I mean, that doesn't make much sense, right?
No, yes, I would say that doesn't make sense. I would say actually that we have many psychological adaptations that allowed us to develop mating systems at the populational level regarded to monogamy or polygamous mating systems.
And then, of course, there's also, these are rarer cases, but there's also cases of polyandry societies. Like, for example, if I remember correctly, there are some agricultural societies in the Himalayas, in Nepal, for example, where two brothers marry the same woman, because, I mean, I guess that the main rationale behind that is that since they are an agricultural society, if the two brothers married different women, then when they inherited the land, they would have to divide it between the two of them, and so they would get smaller portions and they wouldn't really be able to get good enough yields from those smaller portions of land. And so two brothers marry the same woman, and the children are considered children of the both of them. But still,
Yes.
even though there's the issue of paternity uncertainty, in that case, that's sort of buffered by the fact that since they are brothers, they share
right.
they share a big percentage of their DNA, and so the conflict there is reduced between
It's
them.
reduced. Yes, indeed. That's one important aspect of this. They tend to be brothers. Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess that we've already touched here on the question as to whether there are differences between mating systems in ancient human societies compared to more modern human societies. So let me ask you another kind of question. This will probably be the last question of our conversation today. What do you think specifically about polyamory? Because there are people that argue that polyamory is distinct from any form of polygamy, like polygyny or polyandry. Do you look at it as a distinct mating system or not?
To be honest, I haven't thought about this about polyamory, but I would say that polyamory is not the same as a mating system.
Okay.
If we remember the definition of mating systems happens at the level of a population or at the level of a species. I would say that polyamory is more related to the individual level of analysis, and maybe is related to the benefits and costs that individuals find in their environment. as I mentioned it previously, I believe we have many psychological adaptations that allowed us to form different kinds of arrangements, of romantic arrangements.
Mhm.
That depends of what is available to a specific individual. In Western societies, in industrialized societies, more and more people are thinking about the costs of having a single partner for a long period of time, because people are able to develop interests, uh, romantic interests or sexual interests for other people, and they might compromise the relationship if they have with a long-term partner. So there people are discussing these challenges, and they kind of suggest that polyamory would be a solution, even because people would in a consensual way, from both parts, maybe develop more than one long-term relationship at a time, right?
Mhm.
And one of it's interesting to analyze this trend, because one of the arguments that people say is that polyamory already existed. It was only not allowed, or men were allowed to develop more than one romantic relationship at a time, and women were not. But the question is, I think, answering your question, is not polyamory is not a mating system, because mating systems happens at a different level, but we are perfectly able to develop this, because as we see in societies that have polyandry or polygyny, it's perfectly possible to have more than one partner at the same time. So I believe that we have this possibility. It was only the environment that did not accept maybe our cultural restrictions to this, that were more orientated to a monogamy lifestyle,
Mhm.
a
And in the
monogamous lifestyle.
Yes, and in this particular case, I guess that some of the reasons why people who talk about polyamory distinguish it from something like polygyny or polyandry or some form of polygamy is the fact that many times across human societies, a polygamous relationship is based on marriage. I mean, there's marriage associated with it, but in polyamory, not necessarily. And also, I guess that in polyamory, we're not talking about uh, necessarily long-term romantic relationships, but it can be,
Mhm.
for example, a romantic relationship with one partner and then with the others just sexual relationships or relationships that are
Yeah.
simply sexual in their nature, right?
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I agree.
Okay, great. So, Mauro, just before we go, would you like to tell people what are the things you're working on at the moment or will be working on in the near future, if people are interested?
Uh, Yes, I'm working on individual differences in social sexuality, and the factors that affect relationship satisfaction. And more recently, I became interested in the study of emotions from an evolutionary psychological perspective, like anger and shame.
Yeah.
I'm at the beginning of this.
Mhm. Great. And if people are interested, where can they find you and your work on the internet?
They can find me on ResearchGate. I have a profile there, and I have also the Google Citations profile. So it will be easy to find me on those two platforms.
Okay, I'm leaving links to that in the description box of the interview. And thank you so much again for taking the time to come on the show. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Ricardo. It was my pleasure, and thank you for the invitation.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this interview until the end. If you liked it, please share it, leave a like and hit the subscription button. This show is brought to you by Enlights, learning and development done differently. Check their website at enlights.com, and also please consider supporting the show on Patreon or PayPal. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my main patrons and PayPal supporters: Per Ergo Larsen, Jerry Mullerens, Frederick Sunda, Bernardo Seixas, Olaf Alex, Adam Kessel, Matthew Whittingbird, Arno Wolf, Tim Hollis, Eric Alenia, John Connors, Philip Forrest Connolly, Dan Demetri, Robert Windiger, Rui Inácio, Zup, Marco Neves, Colin Holbrook, Phil Kavanagh, Michael Stormir, Samuel André, Francis Ford, Tiago Nunes, Fergal Cossen, Hal Herzog, Nuno Machado, Jonathan Librant, João Linhares, Stantantia, Samuel Correia, Eric Hines, Mark Smith, João Eira, Tom Hummel, Sardas France, David Sloan Wilson, Yacila Dez Araújo, Romain Roach, Diego Londonho Correia, Yannick Punter, Adana Rusmani, Charlotte Bliss, Nicole Barbaro, Adam Hunt, Pavlo Stasevski, Nelek Bach, Guy Madison, Gary G. Alman, Sam Afzal, Adrian Yeager, Paul Tolentino, João Barbosa, Julian Price, Edward Hall, Edin Bronner, Douglas Fry, Franca Bortolotti, Gabriel Ponce Cortez, Ursula Litsky, Scott, Zachary Fish, Tim Duffy, Sonny Smith, John Wiseman, Daniel Friedman, William Buckner, Paul George Arnaud, Luke Lowacki, Georgios Theophanes, Chris Williamson, Peter Wolozin, David Williams, Diogo Costa, Anton Erickson, Charles Murray, Alex Shaw, Maury Martinez, Coralie Chevalier, Bangalore Atheists, Larry D. Lee Jr., Old Erringbone, Sterry, Michael Bailey, Dan Sperber, Robert Grassi, Igor N., Jeff McMahon, Jake Zool, Barnabas Radix, Mark Campbell, Thomas Dovner, Luke Nissen, Chris Story, Kimberly Johnson, Benjamin Galbert, Jessica Nowicki, Linda Brandon, Nicholas Carlson, Ismael Benzliman, George Coriatis, Valentin Steinman, Per Crowley, Kate Van Goller, Alexander Hubbard, Liam Dunaway, BR, Masood Ali Mohammadi, Perpendicular, Jonas Hertner, Ursula Goodenough, Gregory Hastings, David Pinsoff, Sean Nelson, Mike Lavigne, and Dios Necht. A special thanks to my producers, Isar Webb, Jim Frank, Lucas Stafiniak, Tom Vanagdam, Bernard Unic, Curtis Dixon, Benedict Mueller, Thomas Trumbull, Catherine and Patrick Tobin, Giancarlo Montenegro, Alnick Ortiz, and Nick Golden, and to my executive producers, Matthew Lavender, Sergio Quadriano, Bogdan Kanivets, and Rosie. Thank you for all.